In the sealed boardroom, Carter saved the pregnant CEO Alexandra from collapsing during contractions, but instead of gratitude, he was fired for overstepping authority. That evening, hallway camera footage leaked Carter standing between her and a masked attacker. When the truth exploded, investors panicked. The board staged a cover-up. The single father faced a choice: stay silent to feed his daughter or stand up and expose the corporation. The glass tower of Sterling Technologies rose against the coastal skyline like a shard of ambition. Inside, 42 floors hummed with the quiet tension of quarter-end deadlines, shareholder expectations, and the approaching data security audit that had everyone on edge. In the basement service corridors, far from the polished executive suites, a man worked methodically, checking sprinkler sensors with the calm focus of someone who understood that invisible systems kept the visible world running. Carter Leon Hale was 36 years old, broad-shouldered and steady-handed, the kind of man who moved through spaces without demanding attention. His maintenance uniform bore the Sterling Technologies logo, but his eyes carried something the company handbook never mentioned: the weight of a father raising a daughter alone. Every morning, he dropped 7-year-old Louisa at school before his shift. Every evening, he checked her homework before tucking her into bed. Between those moments, he fixed what broke, cleaned what others ignored, and saved every dollar toward a future where she would never have to choose between dreams and survival the way he had. Louisa was bright, curious, always building things. Mechanical models, makeshift circuits, towers of blocks that defied gravity until they didn't. She asked questions faster than he could answer them. When will we get a bigger apartment? Why did Mom leave? Can I be an engineer when I grow up? Carter answered with the truth when he could, and with hope when he couldn't. He had studied electromechanics once before his wife's medical crisis drained their savings and then took her completely. He quit school to care for their infant daughter. The degree never happened, but Louisa's future still could. 42 floors above him, Alexandra Sterling stood at the head of the boardroom table in an elegant red V-neck dress that managed to be both professional and accommodating of her 7-month pregnancy. Her wavy blonde hair was pulled back, her expression composed, but her hands rested briefly on the table edge to steady herself. The medical technology partnership presentation was critical. The shareholders were watching. The board members were skeptical. And the contractions that her obstetrician, Dr. Helen Parker, had warned her about were becoming harder to hide. Alexandra had built Sterling Technologies from a mid-sized firm into a leader in AI-driven healthcare solutions. She had navigated hostile takeovers, managed explosive growth, earned respect in rooms that did not give it freely. But pregnancy in the C-suite was a different kind of battlefield. Any sign of weakness, any hint that her focus might waver, and the vultures would circle. Oliver Grant, the oldest board member, had already suggested she take early leave. Henry Cole in Human Resources had mentioned temporary replacements. She refused both. This partnership, this audit, this moment mattered. What she did not know was that the head of security, Silas Duke, had been selling access to Sterling's medical AI data modules to a competing firm. What she did not know was that Silas needed chaos, needed her credibility shaken, needed the audit delayed or derailed. What she did not know was that the encrypted call he took during the presentation was confirmation that the plan was moving forward. Silas was 40, lean and watchful, with the kind of face that people forgot as soon as he left the room. He excused himself from the boardroom, stepped into the hallway, and answered the call that would set everything in motion. The voice on the other end was brief. The files would be taken today. The timing was perfect. The CEO was distracted. The cameras would show a maintenance worker where he should not be, and by the time anyone sorted through the story, the data would be safely transferred, and Silas would be several $1 million wealthier. He ended the call, checked his watch, and allowed himself a thin smile. The camera system in this section of the 42nd floor hallway had been taken offline 7 minutes ago for scheduled maintenance. He had logged it himself under his security credentials. The blind spot would last just long enough. Inside the boardroom, Alexandra finished her section of the presentation, smiled politely at the questions she could feel were more like challenges, and excused herself. The contractions were intensifying. She needed a moment, needed to breathe, needed to reach the restroom down the hall before anyone noticed the tightness in her jaw. She walked carefully, one hand discreetly supporting her abdomen, the other carrying the leather portfolio with the partnership contracts. Carter was on the 42nd floor checking a malfunctioning sprinkler sensor when he heard the footsteps too quick and too heavy for normal executive traffic. He glanced up from his diagnostic tablet just as a figure in dark clothing rushed past him toward the woman in the red dress. The woman who was clearly pregnant, clearly in distress, and clearly about to be attacked. He did not think. Thinking took time. He moved. Carter's body hit Otis Reed, the hired contractor, at full momentum, slamming him into the glass wall hard enough to leave a spiderweb crack. The portfolio clattered to the floor. Papers scattered. Alexandra staggered, crying out, her hand going to her belly. Carter caught her by the elbow, eased her down to a sitting position against the wall, turned her gently onto her left side the way he remembered from the pregnancy books he had read years ago. His voice was calm, his hands steady. "You're okay. Breathe with me. Help is coming." He pulled out his phone, dialed security, then the medical line. He did not notice Silas Duke emerging from around the corner, adjusting his expression to one of professional concern. He did not see Silas step carefully around the fallen papers, noting the location of the cameras, calculating. He did not hear Silas quietly tell the arriving security team that the maintenance worker had been found in a restricted area in physical contact with the CEO, and that protocol had been violated. The medics arrived. Alexandra was taken to the company medical suite. Carter tried to explain, tried to describe the attacker, but his words seemed to evaporate in the sudden coldness of the room. Henry Cole appeared with 2 security officers and a printed termination notice. The language was bureaucratic and final. Unauthorized access to executive level. Physical contact with company leadership. Violation of workplace safety protocols. Effective immediately. Carter held the termination envelope and tried to understand how saving a life had become a fireable offense. He tried to speak, but Henry's expression was marble. The decision had been made. The paperwork was complete. Security would escort him out. As they walked him toward the service elevator, Carter noticed a small appointment card on the floor near where Alexandra had fallen. A doctor's slip, personal and forgotten in the chaos. He picked it up, folded it carefully, and put it in his pocket. Somewhere in his mind, he knew he should return it. Somewhere deeper, he wondered if that would even be allowed. The night pressed against the windows of Carter's small apartment like a physical weight. Louisa was asleep, curled under her favorite blanket, her latest mechanical model half-finished on the desk. Carter sat at the kitchen table, the termination letter beside him, and did the math he had been avoiding. Rent was due in 12 days. Louisa's after-school program fees were due in 15. The savings account he had been building for her tuition had $3,000, which sounded substantial until you divided it by the cost of existing. He opened his laptop and began searching for jobs. Maintenance technician, facilities manager, building services coordinator. He filled out applications, attached his resume, and tried not to think about the fact that Sterling Technologies was the largest employer in the region, and that blacklisting from one major corporation often meant whispers to others. He submitted 17 applications before midnight. By morning, he had received 3 automated rejections. Louisa found him making breakfast with the focused silence that meant something was wrong. She was 7, but she noticed things. "Daddy, are you sad?" He smiled, flipped her pancake, told her everything was fine. She ate slowly, watching him. "We could sell my big model kit," she said quietly. "The one with all the gears. It cost a lot. Maybe it would help." The offer cracked something in his chest. She was 7 years old and trying to sell her favorite possession because she sensed the danger neither of them could name. Carter knelt beside her chair, took her small hands in his. "You keep your models, sweetheart. I've got this, I promise." She nodded, but her eyes stayed worried, and he hated that she had learned to see through his reassurances. At Sterling Technologies, the machinery of reputation management was already in motion. Henry Cole issued an internal memo describing an employee violation of security protocols, emphasizing that swift action had been taken to ensure leadership safety. Oliver Grant, in a closed-door meeting with Alexandra, suggested that the incident might delay the partnership audit, that perhaps a temporary leave would demonstrate the company's commitment to her well-being. The subtext was clear: her presence was becoming a liability. Alexandra, released from medical observation with instructions to reduce stress, sat in her office and felt the weight of what she could not quite name. She remembered the maintenance worker's face, the steadiness of his voice, the way he had turned her onto her side before she even asked. She remembered the chaos, the accusations, the speed with which he had been removed. She asked her assistant for the incident report. The assistant hesitated, then said Human Resources had sealed the file pending review. She opened her calendar and saw the doctor's appointment she had missed during the chaos. The reminder note was still there, but the physical card was gone. A small thing, probably lost in the confusion. She made a mental note to call Helen's office for a replacement, then returned to the emails demanding her attention, the board members questioning her judgment, the partnership representatives asking politely pointed questions about company stability. Meanwhile, in a corner of the IT department that most people forgot existed, a maintenance worker named Eddie was reviewing server logs for the camera system. Eddie was 60, methodical, and union-protected enough to ask inconvenient questions. He noticed that the hallway cameras on the 42nd floor had lost signal for exactly 7 minutes on the day of the incident. Not a malfunction, a manual override, logged under security credentials. He mentioned it to a colleague. The colleague mentioned it to someone else. By the end of the week, the information had reached Vivian Brooks, the head of public relations, who was sharp enough to recognize the shape of a problem before it fully formed. Vivian was 32, pragmatic, and very good at her job, which meant she understood that covering up the truth was sometimes worse than the truth itself. She quietly downloaded the raw server logs to an external drive and locked it in her desk. Across the city, investigative journalist Audrey Lane received an anonymous email with a subject line that read, "Single dad saves CEO gets fired." The attached files were incomplete but suggestive. Security footage timestamps that did not align. An employee termination dated the same day as an executive medical incident. A name, Carter Leon Hale. Audrey made calls, cross-referenced public records, and began building the outline of a story that smelled like exactly the kind of institutional injustice her readers craved. Carter was stacking boxes at a warehouse when Audrey found him 3 days later. The temp agency job paid $12 an hour and offered no benefits, but it was income, and income meant Louisa ate. Audrey introduced herself, explained what she was investigating, and asked if he would go on record. Carter listened, then shook his head. "I appreciate what you're trying to do, but I can't. I have a daughter. I can't afford to make this bigger." Audrey pressed. Carter stayed firm. She left her card anyway. That night, Carter stood outside Sterling Technologies holding the doctor's appointment card he had kept in his wallet. He did not know why he had come. He did not know what he thought would happen. He walked to the security desk, explained that he needed to return something to CEO Sterling, and was told politely that he was not permitted on the premises. He left the card in an envelope at the desk and walked back into the night. Alexandra received the envelope the next morning. Inside was her missing appointment card and nothing else. No note, no explanation. Just the small kindness of a returned belonging. She asked who had left it. The security log showed Carter Leon Hale's name, the man who had been fired, the man who had saved her, the man whose file she still could not access. She made a decision. Alexandra called Vivian into her office and closed the door. "I need you to find someone for me, quietly." Vivian, who had been expecting this conversation, nodded. Within 2 hours, she had Carter's phone number. Within 3, Alexandra had sent a carefully worded text message. "I received the appointment card. Thank you. I would like to speak with you if you are willing. There are questions I need answered." Carter stared at the message for a long time before responding. They met at a coffee shop 15 blocks from Sterling Technologies' neutral territory, where neither of them would be recognized. Alexandra arrived in sunglasses and a simple coat, her pregnancy visible but her identity obscured. Carter arrived early, ordered black coffee, and tried not to look as nervous as he felt. She thanked him for coming. He nodded, unsure what else to do. "I need to understand what happened that day," she said. "The official report says you were in a restricted area without authorization. But I remember you helping me. I remember someone else. Someone running." She paused. "The details do not match." Carter described what he saw: the figure in dark clothing, the grab for her portfolio, the impact against the glass. He mentioned the crack in the wall, the papers on the floor, the way security had arrived so quickly as if they had been waiting. Alexandra listened, her expression shifting from neutral to focused. "There should be camera footage," she said. "Hallway cameras cover that entire floor." "Maybe there is," Carter said, "but I don't have access to it, and even if I did, I don't know who would believe me." Alexandra was quiet for a moment. Then she made another decision. "I will look into the footage, and if what you're saying is true, I will make it right." Carter wanted to believe her, but belief was expensive and he had learned not to spend what he could not afford. "With respect, Ms. Sterling, the system protects itself. I'm just trying to survive long enough to figure out what comes next." She did not argue. She understood perhaps better than he knew how institutions consumed individuals. But she also understood that some truths once seen could not be ignored. She asked if she could call him if she found anything. He said yes, though he did not expect to hear from her again. What neither of them knew was that Vivian had already begun pulling the archived camera files. What neither of them knew was that Silas Duke was monitoring access logs and had noticed the unusual activity. What neither of them knew was that the collision between truth and power was accelerating, and that the choice to speak or stay silent was about to be taken out of their hands. The story broke on a cold Thursday morning. Audrey Lane's article appeared on the front page of the city's most read news site under the headline, "Maintenance Worker Saves CEO Loses Job." The piece was carefully sourced, legally vetted, and devastating in its clarity. It described Carter's actions, the immediate termination, the sealed incident report, and the troubling gaps in Sterling Technologies' official narrative. It noted that the CEO had been 7 months pregnant at the time. It asked why a man who prevented an assault had been punished instead of honored. Within hours, the article had been shared thousands of times. Readers flooded the comments with outrage. Local television stations picked up the story. Sterling Technologies' communications department went into crisis mode. The stock price dipped 2% in morning trading. Oliver Grant convened an emergency board meeting. Henry Cole prepared defensive talking points. Silas Duke in his office calculated how quickly he could transfer his offshore accounts if the investigation widened. And Alexandra, reading the article on her phone, felt the careful control she had maintained for months beginning to fracture. She had been trying to manage this quietly, trying to fix the problem through internal channels, trying to protect both Carter and the company's reputation. But Audrey's article had made silence impossible. The public was watching now. The board would demand a response, and Alexandra understood with sudden clarity that the only response that mattered was the truth. She opened her laptop, drafted a statement, and sent it directly to the company's media team with instructions to release it immediately. The statement was brief. It confirmed that Carter Leon Hale had assisted her during a medical emergency. It acknowledged that his termination was under review. It promised a full investigation into the circumstances of the incident. It thanked him publicly for his actions. The board was furious. Oliver called her personally to express his concerns about acting without consultation. Henry warned that the statement opened the company to legal liability. Silas said nothing but began quietly deleting files from his encrypted server. The public response was immediate and overwhelming. The narrative shifted. Carter was no longer just a fired maintenance worker. He was a single father who had done the right thing and been punished for it. Alexandra was no longer just a CEO under scrutiny. She was a woman who had been attacked in her own building and whose company had tried to cover it up. The pressure on Sterling Technologies intensified. Vivian, recognizing that the tide had turned, brought the raw server logs to Alexandra's office. "You need to see this," she said, and pulled up the timestamp discrepancies. The 7-minute gap in camera coverage. The manual override logged under Silas Duke's credentials. The fact that the override had been scheduled hours before the incident, not in response to a malfunction. Alexandra studied the data, her expression hardening. "Who else has seen this?" "Just me. And now you. I need the original files secured. I need legal to review this quietly, and I need to know who authorized Silas to take those cameras offline." Alexandra paused. "Actually, I need to know why he would want them offline at all." Vivian had been thinking the same thing. If this was planned, if someone knew an incident was going to happen in that hallway at that specific time, then we are not talking about a wrongful termination, Alexandra finished. We are talking about conspiracy. They worked quickly. Vivian contacted an independent legal team that specialized in corporate investigations. Alexandra requested access to Silas's security logs, his communications records, his personnel file. She authorized a third-party audit of the camera systems. She instructed her assistant to arrange meetings with every employee who had been on the 42nd floor that day, and she called Carter. He was at the warehouse stacking boxes when his phone rang. He almost did not answer. "Mr. Hale," Alexandra said, "I need you to come back to Sterling Technologies, not as an employee, as a witness. We have evidence that suggests your termination was part of a larger problem, and I need your help to understand what actually happened." Carter hesitated. "Why would I help the company that fired me?" "Because this is not about the company anymore," Alexandra said. "This is about making sure the truth comes out before someone else gets hurt. And because I am asking." There was a long silence. Then Carter said, "When?" They met in a conference room on the 35th floor away from the executive suites with Vivian and 2 lawyers present. Alexandra walked Carter through the server logs, the camera gaps, the timeline. She showed him the records that proved Silas had disabled the cameras before the incident occurred. She asked him to describe everything he remembered in as much detail as possible. Carter described the glass wall, the crack pattern, the way the attacker's shoe had left a scrape of dark paint on the metal handrail. He described the portfolio hitting the floor, the scatter of papers, the angle of the light. The lawyers took notes. Vivian recorded the session. Alexandra listened with the focus of someone who understood that every detail mattered. When they returned to the hallway to examine the physical evidence, the crack in the glass was still there, barely visible, unless you knew where to look. The paint scrape on the handrail had been cleaned, but forensic analysis could recover traces. The scattered papers had been collected, but the sequence of their fall could be reconstructed. The pieces were coming together. Helen Parker, Alexandra's obstetrician, provided a medical report detailing the bruising pattern on Alexandra's shoulder, consistent with being caught during a fall or collision. The angle and pressure suggested she had been moving away from an impact, not toward one. It corroborated Carter's account. Meanwhile, Audrey Lane, following her own threads, discovered that Otis Reed, a contract worker with a history of corporate espionage, had been paid $20,000 by an encrypted account 2 days before the incident. The payment trail was complex, routed through offshore holdings and shell companies, but forensic accountants could trace it, and when they did, it led directly to accounts controlled by Silas Duke. The board met again, this time with the lawyers present. Oliver Grant, confronted with the evidence, went pale. Henry Cole insisted he had acted on information provided by security and had no knowledge of any conspiracy. Vivian presented the server logs. The lawyers presented the payment records, and Alexandra, standing at the head of the table, presented a choice. "We can try to contain this quietly," she said. "Pay settlements, hope the story fades. Or we can do what should have been done from the beginning, tell the truth publicly, accept responsibility, and demonstrate that this company values integrity over reputation." Oliver argued for containment. Henry argued for legal strategy. But the younger board members, aware that the public was watching and that institutional trust was fragile, sided with Alexandra. The vote was close, but it carried. Sterling Technologies scheduled a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, cameras, and shareholders. Alexandra stood at the podium in her red dress, visibly pregnant, visibly determined. Beside her on a screen, the presentation was ready: camera logs, payment records, timeline analysis. Oliver Grant sat in the front row, his expression carefully neutral. Henry Cole sat beside him, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else. Silas Duke was notably absent. Alexandra began. 3 weeks ago, a member of our maintenance staff, Carter Leon Hale, prevented an assault on me in our headquarters. Instead of being thanked, he was terminated. I am here today to explain why that happened, to accept responsibility for our failures, and to ensure it never happens again. She walked through the timeline: the disabled cameras, the hired attacker, the manufactured justification for termination, the data theft scheme that Silas Duke had been operating for months, selling proprietary medical AI research to competitors. The attack on Alexandra had been designed to create chaos, to distract from an audit that would have exposed the thefts, and to discredit anyone who might interfere. The room was silent. Alexandra played the raw camera footage from the adjacent hallway, the angle that had not been disabled. The quality was poor, the view partially obscured, but it clearly showed Carter moving to intercept someone. Clearly showed the collision, clearly showed him helping Alexandra afterward. It did not show a man overstepping. It showed a man protecting. She introduced the forensic payment records linking Silas to Otis Reed. She introduced Helen Parker's medical report. She introduced the timeline that proved Silas had disabled the cameras hours before the incident, knowing what was coming. And then she looked directly into the nearest camera. "Mr. Hale saved my life and possibly the life of my child. In return, our systems failed him. I failed him. Sterling Technologies failed him. Today, we are offering him full reinstatement back pay and a formal apology. We are also creating a new position, building safety engineer, reporting directly to executive leadership. We are offering that position to Mr. Hale if he chooses to accept it." A journalist raised a hand. "Where is Silas Duke?" "Mr. Duke is currently being sought by law enforcement," Alexandra said. "We have provided all evidence to the appropriate authorities and are cooperating fully with their investigation." Another journalist. "Why should the public trust Sterling Technologies after this?" Alexandra did not hesitate. "You should not trust us because we say so. You should watch what we do next. We are implementing a company-wide ethics review. We are installing tamper-proof camera systems. We are creating an anonymous reporting line for employees to report misconduct without fear of retaliation. We are proving through action that we mean what we say." As the press conference ended, police officers entered the building. They had tracked Silas to his apartment where he had been attempting to flee the country. He was arrested on charges of corporate espionage, conspiracy to commit assault, and fraud. His encrypted communications revealed a network of data buyers, implicated employees at 3 other firms, and exposed a black market for medical AI research worth tens of millions of dollars. The story exploded across national news. Sterling Technologies' stock dropped sharply, then recovered as investors recognized the company's transparency. Competitors scrambled to audit their own security departments. Federal regulators opened investigations into the medical AI data trade. And Carter Leon Hale, standing in his small apartment watching the press conference on his laptop, received a phone call from Alexandra Sterling. "The position is real," she said. "The offer is real, but I will understand if you do not want to work for us again." Carter thought about Louisa's tuition. He thought about the principle of the thing. He thought about what it meant to be seen, to be believed, to have the truth acknowledged publicly. "I will accept the position," he said, "on one condition: that this company actually means what it said about protecting people who speak up." "I will make sure of it," Alexandra said. "You have my word." 3 weeks later, Carter started his new role. Building safety engineer sounded impressive, but the work was practical: auditing systems, training staff, ensuring that the invisible infrastructure stayed functional and that the people who maintained it were respected. He hired 2 assistants, reviewed protocols, and made recommendations that leadership actually implemented. It felt strange to have his voice carry weight. It felt stranger to realize he was good at it. Louisa visited the office once, invited by Alexandra to tour the educational lab, where Sterling Technologies developed learning tools for schools. The 2 of them walked through the space, Alexandra explaining the technology, Louisa asking rapid-fire questions about circuits and algorithms. Carter watched from the doorway, his daughter animated and curious, and felt something that had been clenched in his chest for years begin to loosen. Alexandra reduced her hours as her pregnancy progressed, following Helen's advice to prioritize her health. She delegated more, trusted her team more, and discovered that the company did not collapse without her constant presence. Oliver Grant retired from the board, quietly citing personal reasons. Henry Cole was transferred to a subsidiary office in another state, a lateral move that everyone understood was a demotion. Vivian Brooks was promoted to Chief Communications Officer, a role she accepted with the understanding that her job was to tell the truth, not manage it. The ethics committee that Alexandra had promised was formed, led by independent advisors with no financial ties to Sterling Technologies. The anonymous reporting hotline received 43 calls in its first month, ranging from minor grievances to serious concerns about harassment and financial irregularities. Each was investigated. Some resulted in disciplinary action. Some resulted in policy changes. All were taken seriously. The new camera system was installed, encrypted, and monitored by a third-party security firm with no connection to Sterling's internal operations. The tamper-proof design meant that no one, not even executive leadership, could disable recording without leaving an auditable trail. It was expensive. It was necessary. It sent a message. Carter and Alexandra spoke occasionally, brief conversations in the hallway or the rooftop garden where employees took breaks. They talked about systems, about safety protocols, about the difficulty of changing institutional culture. They did not talk about the attack or the press conference or the strange intimacy of having your worst moments made public. They did not need to. The understanding was there, unspoken, built on shared experience and mutual respect. There was no romance. There was no dramatic declaration. There was simply the slow accumulation of trust between 2 people who had been tested and had chosen each in their own way to do the right thing even when it cost them. Louisa asked once if Ms. Sterling was going to be her new mom. Carter smiled and explained that life was more complicated than that people could care about each other in different ways, that friendship and respect were their own kind of love. Louisa nodded, satisfied, and returned to her model aircraft. On a bright morning in early autumn, Sterling Technologies held its first Safety for Life Day, an annual event designed to highlight the importance of workplace safety and the people who maintained it. The main lobby was filled with employees, journalists, and community members. A stage had been set up near the center atrium where light poured through the glass ceiling in geometric patterns. Alexandra stood at the podium, 8 months pregnant, now radiant in her red dress. Beside her were Carter and Louisa, both slightly uncomfortable with the attention but present nonetheless. The event was designed to be symbolic, the activation of the new emergency alarm system, a network of sensors and alerts that would protect everyone in the building. But it was also designed to be a statement that safety mattered, that the people who ensured safety mattered, that a company was only as strong as its commitment to protecting the most vulnerable. Alexandra spoke briefly. She thanked Carter publicly again and noted that his leadership had transformed the company's approach to safety. She introduced the new protocols, the new training programs, the new culture of accountability, and then she invited Carter and Louisa to join her at the ceremonial control panel. The three of them stood together, hands on the activation lever. The room quieted. Cameras flashed, and together they pulled the lever. The alarm system activated with a soft chime. Green lights cascading across the control panel. The room erupted in applause. Carter looked at Louisa, whose face was bright with pride. He looked at Alexandra, who smiled at him with genuine warmth. He looked at the crowd, at the journalists, at the Sterling Technologies employees who had once walked past him without seeing him and who now knew his name. And he felt something unfamiliar, the sense that he had not just survived, but that he had helped build something better. After the ceremony, as the crowd dispersed and the event staff began breaking down the stage, Carter walked Louisa back to the car. She chattered happily about the alarm system, about the lab tour, about whether she could intern at Sterling Technologies when she was older. He listened, nodded, and felt the weight of the past months finally lifting. His phone buzzed. A message from Alexandra Lunch tomorrow. We should talk about the new safety training curriculum, and maybe about setting up an educational fund for employees' children. Your input would be valuable, he replied. Sounds good. I will bring ideas. Louisa looked up at him. Are you happy, Daddy? He thought about the question, about the job he had lost and the job he had gained, about the truth that had been buried and the truth that had been spoken, about the systems that crushed people and the systems that could, with effort, be rebuilt to protect them. Yeah, sweetheart, he said. I think I am. The sun angled through the glass tower behind them, casting long shadows across the parking lot. The city moved around them indifferent and vast, but in this small moment, Carter allowed himself to believe that one person's courage could matter, that ordinary actions could have extraordinary consequences, and that the truth, when brought into the light, could redefine everything. He opened the car door for Louisa, helped her with her seatbelt, and drove toward home. Behind them, Sterling Technologies stood against the sky, its glass walls reflecting the world, but also now revealing what happened inside. A building where safety meant more than security, where transparency meant more than reputation, where the people who kept the systems running were finally seen. And in that seeing, in that acknowledgement, something fundamental had shifted. Not just in one company, but in the understanding that institutions were made of individuals and that individuals, when they refused to stay silent, could change the trajectory of everything. The road ahead was ordinary. Traffic lights, crosswalks, the familiar route home. But Carter drove with the window down, the autumn air cool against his face, and allowed himself to feel what he had not felt in a very long time. Hope, purpose, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when it mattered, he had chosen right, and that this time finally the choice had been honored.